Russia's economy is proving resilient against an onslaught of Western sanctions. Authorities say the economy is restructuring but is expected to grow this year, even after a substantial increase in defense spending linked, of course, to the war in Ukraine. Dasha Chernyshyova has more from Moscow.
As Europe discusses another round of Russian sanctions, the Kremlin remains confident of financing its so-called special military operation in Ukraine. And it seems to be planning for that operation to run well into next year. The recently adopted 2024 budget reflects a significant increase in defense spending. It will receive around 30% of all budget spending, an increase from around 15% allocated before the start of the operation. Russia's economy has adapted to fit new objectives, and experts forecast may continue to grow next year, albeit with some restraints.
С учетом того, что российский бюджет вполне сбалансирован, учитывая то, что нефтегазовые доходы все равно позволяют проводить инвестирование внутри страны, да, есть некоторые сложности там с технологиями, но это вопрос, который там в среднесрочной перспективе решается по разным отраслям, и в принципе мы здесь тоже достаточно оптимистично смотрим в будущее.
Optimism is something that Russian officials and experts emphasize when commenting on Western sanctions. These restrictions forced Russia to turn to domestic audience for money and investments, like at this major expo, where Russian regions promote themselves to each other. Russia began to produce more domestically to achieve what it calls technological sovereignty, essentially weaning itself off Western suppliers and sources instead of relying on oil and gas revenues.
Газовая отрасль стала приносить значительно меньше доходов бюджета, но в целом нефтянка в этом плане вытягивает. И сейчас доля нефтегазовых доходов в общем доходах бюджета она снижается и будет даже меньше, наверное, 30%. Раньше она была вот между 40 и 50, колебалась на протяжении очень многих лет.
Despite that, the economy has been relatively resilient. Inflation is expected to fall to around 7% by the end of this year, compared with nearly 12% in 2022, but still above the target of 4% set for 2024. Yet Russians say they do see a more significant increase in the price of basic staples, including food, medicine and clothes.
Russia's central bank has tightened monetary policy and capital controls. Its key interest rate was raised to 15%, and the authorities say they could increase it even further. The move came after the Russian currency, the ruble, lost about 30% of its value in October against January this year.
In the short term, experts predict GDP growth around 3%, according to the most optimistic forecasts, still far above earlier negative estimates.
В краткосрочной, среднесрочной перспективе у нас все замечательно, с точки зрения экономики. А с другой стороны, есть в том числе негативные аспекты, связанные с перегревом. То есть фактически, как и везде, перегрев, рост заработных плат, и в том числе там, по части сегментов, связанных с ВПК, с СВО, там рост зарплат достаточно существенный, что как раз приводит к росту потребительской инфляции.
Russia is scheduled to hold a presidential election in March next year. And until then, experts say no major economic policy changes should be expected. Until then, however, logistical challenges, labor shortages and shifts in the global market could mean that the risk of the economy overheating is growing as well. Dasha Chernyshyova, CNA, Moscow.